Today's episode is more mid-century neighborhoods in Tucson. I'm Nick Labriola, and along with my wife Kim, we are Real Tucson. We like to make videos all about what makes living in Tucson cool. Kim especially is a bit of an architecture nerd. She does all of the research on these different vlogs that we like to bring you as often as we can. We're going to be talking about 6 more neighborhoods today in no particular order. And first up is going to be Windsor Park. Kim, where is Windsor Park located?
Windsor Park is located on the northeast side of Tucson, near Speedway and Camino Seco. J. Herbert Oxman was the builder of Windsor Park. It was designed by Swanson. I don't recall his first name.
Very cool. So what do you think makes this neighborhood stand out?
What's cool about this neighborhood is it's about 125 homes. They are particularly stylish 1960s design. You know, we don't have Eichlers in Tucson, but they're probably the closest thing that you're going to get to an Eichler in our city.
Yeah, when I drive through there, when people call and ask about mid-century modern, when it was initially developed, at least, probably every home in the neighborhood would have been a true mid-century modern style type of home instead of just like a typical ranch. Even the layout of the neighborhood is situated so there's not as much through traffic. It's a little bit quieter streets. There's lots of cul-de-sacs. The lot sizes are probably about a quarter acre plus or minus. Maybe Kim could talk a little bit about what the hallmarks of a mid-century house would be.
Well, I think there's a difference between mid-century versus mid-century modern. And nowadays, I think mid-century modern gets thrown around a lot, even if it's not truly mid-century modern. These homes are typically more mid-century modern, and some of those hallmarks are the large windows, floor-to-ceiling windows, going along the roof line. J. Herbert Oxman had lots of interesting newspaper advertisements where he would talk about the square footage of the windows. So there's
kind
a lot
of interesting at the time.
Yeah, a lot of his homes have a lot of sliding glass doors, which kind of, rather than having windows, it's just couple big pieces of glass.
Yeah, Oxman
rather than a window.
May have had a knack for marketing, or he hired a firm that kind of was able to connect with the feeling of the time, but a lot of it was pretty provocative and memorable. We don't really know what happened to Oxman. Kim gets kind of down the rabbit holes with the research on these.
I believe he came from New York, but I could not find anything about, when he left Tucson. I believe he stayed here until about at least the 70s, because I think he was building in the early 70s as well. But I didn't see anything about his death or an obituary or anything, so I'm not sure what happened to him after the 70s. If anybody knows, it'd be great to find out, so let us know.
Just an international man of mystery, apparently. So another thing that I think we should talk about, the neighborhood itself, some of the people that are living there have been there for decades, and the neighborhood isn't on the historic register, but some of the residents are trying to get that status. What can happen though is there'll be a mix where during the 1980s there were very high interest rates, and instead of moving, people would often add on to their homes. So there were some that have fallen victim of really bad additions, or in the 80s and 90s, some of them have been stuccoed over. So there's some really great examples of true mid-century modern homes still, and a lot of the neighborhood, the owners are revitalizing it. So there's some fantastic homes, but then there are some homes that just aren't quite as nice, or unfortunately falling into some disrepair, and you'll probably see that in some of the footage that we've got. But what we do think is cool about it, even when it was designed, I think they were targeting luxury on a budget. So you can get a really true mid-century modern house, and it's not quite as expensive as some of the other neighborhoods. And then even some of the neighborhoods surrounding it, they're not as well known, but if you know where to look, there can be some really great houses with some great lines.
Yeah, some downsides about the neighborhood. A lot of people don't want to live that far east. If you're wanting to live close to downtown, it's a decent trek, probably about 25-30 minutes to get to downtown. A little bit more difficult to get to the freeway. So I would say those are a couple of the downsides of it. Other than that, I think it's a pretty cool neighborhood with some really fantastic architecture. And if you want to learn more about Windsor Park, we do have a blog article about it, and I'll link that below as well in the description of this video.
Up next, we have Harold Bell Wright Estates, which is located on the east side near Speedway and Wilmot. And Kim, can you give me a little bit of history about Harold Bell Wright?
So Harold Bell Wright was an author in the early 20th century. He was said to be the highest selling author at the time. He had quite a few of his books were turned into movies, including The Mine with the Iron Door, which was filmed in the Tucson area. And fun fact, they actually did the movie premiere at the Realty Theater in downtown Tucson.
And I think the restaurant up on Mount Lemon is named after that movie.
It is, yeah. If you go up to the Iron Door restaurant up in Mount Lemon, there's a poster of the movie there, so that's kind of cool.
And why did he come out to Arizona?
He came to Tucson because he suffered from tuberculosis, so he came out for the weather. And he moved here in, I believe, the 20s. He purchased that lot of land, a big chunk of land out there, in 1920. His house on that land was completed in 1922. He eventually moved to California, I believe, in 1935, and then sold his estate shortly after that. And in 1950, his land was subdivided into Harold Bell Wright Estates.
Right, and then his estate gave permission, so the streets are named after books and characters, so it kind of has a theme.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yes.
And well, why don't you tell us what's unique about just the neighborhood layout and what the feel of the neighborhood is like?
So what I think is interesting about this neighborhood is it was probably targeted at a more affluent buyer when it was developed. It was a little further east, and a lot of the neighborhoods being built at the time would be more rectilinear. But these are going to be half-acre plus lots.
Right.
And it's going to be very curvilinear, and there's only 4 access points into the neighborhood. So you're not going to get a lot of through traffic. There won't be as much traffic noise. It'll just be a little quieter if you want to take a walk.
Except there are, the homes on the perimeter are directly on Speedway and Wilmot. So those homes definitely get a lot more traffic noise. And most of those homes usually have walls or something in front of them.
East of Wilmot in the 50s was pretty much dirt roads. So when this was being developed, it's not like Speedway would have been a big deterrent. The city kind of grew around this neighborhood.
Right.
In a sense, it makes it kind of a neat neighborhood too, because you're centrally located, and where are you going to find a half-acre parcel in the middle of town? It's a little unusual in that regard. So there's pluses and minuses with that.
I think what's cool about the neighborhood is just the wildlife that you see in there. You know, coyotes and bobcats and javelina. You know, you feel like you're just in the middle of the desert, but then you're kind of in the middle of the city all at the same time.
It's also located near the 3rd Street bike route, and they recently put in a bike/pedestrian crossing called a Huck Light.
Also, the neighborhood has a little neighborhood park that has, you know, some grassy fields and a playground and some picnic tables and stuff. So it's kind of a nice place to have a picnic. During the early part of the pandemic, we had a few lunch picnics just to get outside, and we went over there because it's
get some sun, bring our dog.
Right. Yeah. Do you want to talk about some of the designers of some of the houses, because they were custom homes? They kind of, I believe, sold the lots sort of one at a time.
Yeah, so it's actually kind of a who's who of some of the more independent and some of the bigger name in retrospect mid-century designers. So Tom Gist is somebody that we're going to be talking about more during this blog, but he was a builder who never actually went to architecture school, but he had a really unique style. Nicholas Keller did the Wilmot Library, which was Kim's childhood library, and is a really great example of mid-century architecture. It's got some really cool artwork friezes that are on the exterior of the building.
But he also designed at least one home in the neighborhood.
Yeah, there's one really noteworthy home in the neighborhood. I'm not sure if there's others, but he would be a pretty big name. Art Brown was an awesome mid-century architect. He was really forward-thinking. He would use trom walls, passive solar. Back in the 40s, he was thinking about like site layout, movable canopies to keep the sun off you when you were enjoying the garden, but also trom walls where they would absorb heat during the day and supply passive solar heat through the night. Really interesting guy. Cook and Swaim also built homes in there. Anne Rysdale, who studied under Art Brown, and for a long time, I think she was the only registered female architect in Arizona.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's Anne Rysdale's, and then I can never pronounce, he's a Norwegian architect, Justad and Knipe were also designing homes in there, and they've also got homes around town. So a few other things to note, it is on the historic district. So if you have a contributing property, you would probably be eligible for a pretty good tax
savings on your property taxes. Yeah.
If you do like the content that you're seeing, please hit the subscribe button and like. We're also available. We'll leave our contact information down below where you can email or call us, and we're happy to answer any questions. Up next, we're going to be talking about Wilshire Heights, which was another neighborhood that I think was geared more towards an affluent buyer when it was designed. The neighborhood itself has fewer access points, and common theme here, they were trying to reduce the through traffic so there wouldn't be as much noise. If you did want to walk in the evenings, you'd have a little more pedestrian friendly streets. Kids could play in the streets, just a little bit different feel. And even at the time, they were marketing it as, instead of just a typical blue collar kind of neighborhood, just a little bit more of an affluent buyer. This neighborhood is located centrally near Broadway and Craycroft, which is just a little bit southwest of the Harold Bell Wright Estates. And they're mostly ranch style homes. Who were some of the designers that were building in?
It was developed by the Chesson Construction Company. They sold the lots off to individual builders or individuals who hired builders. Some of the builders and architects that are represented within the neighborhood would be Tom Gist, who we've talked about before and we'll be talking about in another neighborhood coming up. William Wild, who was a modernist architect in Tucson. Arthur Brown, who we just talked about in the last segment. Paul Burer, who was a builder. He wasn't an architect, but he built some interesting mid-century modern homes. And then the Luss Corporation, which we had a video about the Luss Corporation last month, so you'll want to check that one out as well. But they also have a few homes in the neighborhood. The lot sizes are usually about half acre or slightly smaller. It has a little bit of a desert feel just because those lot sizes are a little bigger. And it has a nice little community or neighborhood park that has a brand new playground that they just installed recently.
And in general, this is going to be a really well situated, located neighborhood. We talked about it with Harold Bell Wright. The city kind of grew up around these neighborhoods. At the time, this was pretty far east, but you're going to be closer to things like Trader Joe's. This is fairly close to the 3rd Street bike route. There's going to be...
It's actually on its own bike route. The 16th Street Timrod bike route has a light activated crossing that goes across Craycroft, and you can actually get to Reed Park from there and continue on your journey from there.
Next, we're going to be talking about Broadmoor, which is a centrally located neighborhood that is near Broadway and Country Club, near the eastern edge of Reed Park. And what I thought was kind of interesting about this neighborhood, Kim in her research found out that Country Club was named because there used to be a golf course where Broadmoor now is, and it didn't have grass and the typical greens and things. They would just treat it with oil, which I'm sure smelled very nice when we had warmer days out golfing. A couple of more competitive golf courses had been built. So it went out of business, and then it was later redeveloped as Broadmoor neighborhood.
So I think of Broadmoor as probably Tucson's first infill neighborhood. It's the first neighborhood that, was something else and didn't work out. So they decided, hey, we're going to put some housing here.
Yeah, and it's a cool location. It's located near the edge of the Sunshine Mile. Kind of carrying on with the theme, there's only 4 access points into the neighborhood, and it's got pretty broad streets, and there's also Was it Arroyo Chico?
Arroyo Chico runs through it, which is a wash. It only really runs if you get a good rain, which this past couple weeks we've gotten a few good rains, so it's been running. It's lined with big oleander bushes, so the houses that either face that on either side of it, it's kind of cool because you just face this big green area. But it also has a little pedestrian bridge that goes over the Arroyo Chico in the center of it, whereas the people who are driving cars have to go on either side, kind of on the edge of the neighborhood to cross the Arroyo Chico.
Then there's a little plaza called Malvern Plaza, and it's located near the Arroyo, and it's got some picnic tables and a little free library. And because of how the neighborhood has kind of more of a walkable feel to it, they have a voluntary HOA which they'll organize neighborhood events such as parades, potlucks, and there's also Porch Fest, which is kind of a Tucson thing, which we should probably talk about at some point.
Yeah, they hosted a Porch Fest once. Hopefully they'll host another one in the future, but it's a cool community event where people offer up their front porch to different musicians, and usually they'll have 2 or 3 musicians during an afternoon play at that porch, but also at usually 4 or 5 other porches. Sometimes they'll have some food trucks
and face painters. So it's kind of like a community building event, and it's all basically voluntary. Like all of the bands or musicians play for free.
Yeah, it's fun.
And the homeowners donate electricity and probably put out some free water and such for guests and the bands. And it's a nice afternoon event.
And people either walk or they ride their bikes from house to house. It's a lot of fun.
Walk their dogs. It's cool. So typically the lot sizes here are going to be from about 1/5 of an acre to 1/4 acre. There's some pretty good diversity as far as the architectural styles go in there. I don't think it was developed by any one.
Not that I'm aware of.
And I'm actually not sure how long it took to be built out. So
I think it was mostly built out in the 50s and 60s. They did have some requirements for the builders. They had to, sell their homes at a certain price. They had to have a certain number of square footage because they wanted the homes to be of a certain quality. And so I think the northern part of the neighborhood tends to be, they're all masonry construction for the most part, but the northern part of the neighborhood tends to be red brick and maybe some burnt adobe. The southern part of the neighborhood is often a concrete block that's painted. That's what I've noticed anyway.
Yes, and it's built south of Broadway Village, which was designed by
Josiah
Jostler. And
it was Tucson's first shopping center, and it's a really pretty series of buildings, and there's a lot of restaurants and shops and offices and stuff in there.
Yep, and Broadmoor is also a historic district, so if you have a contributing home, you can have some substantial tax savings on your property taxes. Okay, next we're going to be talking about San Clemente, which is another centrally located neighborhood near Broadway and Alvernon. And tell me a little bit about
San Clemente?
San Clemente, yeah.
I like San Clemente. It's a cool neighborhood. It kind of reminds me of El Encanto a little bit, but maybe a smaller, El Encanto light. It was developed, actually, it has a lot of ranch style homes, but it was actually started in the early 30s, I believe. So there's a lot of homes that were built in the 30s and 40s as well. So not all ranch style homes, but primarily ranch style homes.
Yes, and then some of the ranch style homes might be like Spanish Revival Ranch. There's a little bit of...
Right, some of them have tile roofs, which you don't typically see in a ranch style home, or at least not in Tucson.
Yeah, so definitely not a cookie cutter feel to this neighborhood.
What I also like about it is it has a very rectilinear grid layout, except there's these curvilinear streets intersecting the grid, which is really cool. If you take a walk or drive through there, probably when you first move there, you might get a little bit lost.
I still get a little lost just driving around, but
yeah, but we have GPS.
We have GPS,
okay.
so it's okay. Yeah. Anyway, this neighborhood is close to Reed Park, and there is a small grassy park with some mature trees, picnic tables, so nice place to visit.
Yeah, nice place to walk the dog too.
So another thing that I think is cool about this neighborhood is there's a condo development called Randolph House, which is really well kept and a little more affordable, and the development itself is really neat and has a lot of character. There's also the Ivy, which I think is also on the historic register, which they had rented. I've never been inside one. I'd love to see inside
The
one of
Ivy
these.
is apartments that you can rent.
Yeah, so you could rent an apartment or buy a condo and still live in a cool historic neighborhood, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, I believe both of those buildings were built in the late 40s.
Yeah, and the neighborhood itself is a historic district, and then there was also, not included in the neighborhood, but south of it is another condo development.
Called Eden Rock.
And we've got some blogs. That one has got some pretty interesting history. I don't know if we'll get into it here, but
you can read more about it. We'll link the article below.
yeah, and we'll include some pictures because it's got some pretty kitschy, cool.
Yeah. San Clemente is a historic district. That means you can save money on your property taxes if you're living in a contributing property.
The last neighborhood we're going to talk about is called Leonora Annex. And I would think probably what makes this neighborhood most notable is Tom Gist had his office nearby in the 50s and developed a good portion of the neighborhood. He didn't build all of the homes in there, but he's a noteworthy builder, and Kim did a very good blog article, which we'll link if you want more information on him. So Tom Gist grew up in the Chicago area and seems as if he was pretty heavily influenced by Frank Lloyd Wright. I guess he would walk by some of his projects where he used to live. He ended up joining the Army, and he had won a medal because he had designed, he was a very clever guy, he had designed a tool when during World War II they would actually have to physically drop bombs out of bombers, and a person was required to do calculations to hit the target. He designed a tool to help with that process and ended up winning a medal. He was born into kind of a builder family, it seems like. I believe his father was a builder. So when he came out to Tucson, he started building more modest homes. And probably in the 50s and 60s, he kind of really hit his stride and started doing more mid-century modern designs.
Well, when he started out in Tucson, he actually was a builder, and he would build for other architects and other designers before he kind of went out on his own.
And I think we mentioned before when Kim's grandparents moved out here.
Oh, and I found out,
Grandpa Joe.
yeah, about a year or two ago, that my grandfather's first job when he moved out here in the early 60s was as a concrete laborer for Tom Gist's company. So that was kind of a neat surprise.
So probably some of the hallmarks of a Gist design home, a lot of them would be primarily burnt adobe, and they would often have caps of burnt adobe or concrete on some of the walls, and they would have different pony walls to add architectural interest. They would have a sloping roof, kind of a low slung roof, often clear story windows, and he had, I can't remember the brand name of the material, but it was kind of like a plexiglass that was opaque that would be up in the clear story windows.
The clear story were on the gable ends, so just like at the very top of the gable end, it would be kind of a triangular piece of material. I think it was called Phylon or something like that. But he usually would have the ribbon windows facing the front of the house, and that's where the guest bedrooms would be. And then along the back of the house, how he would site the homes is the back of the house would be where the view and the mountains were. So he would have large picture windows back there facing the living areas and the kitchen typically. And oftentimes the cabinetry was usually mahogany as well as the closet doors. And then he had his woodworker that he had hired for, most of the homes had a very unique style of drawer pull or cabinet pull, which we'll show you.
I remember when Kim was still working in kitchen design, a couple times she would come home and somebody with a Gist would come in and ask her to bid where they were going to tear out the original Gist kitchen. She's like, I hope I don't get this job.
I didn't even know what a
Gist was at the time.
Who Tom Gist was, but they would come in with photos of these kitchens, and I was like, my God, this is amazing. How they built it all in place, and they'd have sliding doors and just unique ways of concealing things. He definitely had a distinct style.
Yeah. So this neighborhood is also on a grid. It's probably more of a conventional type neighborhood than the last two we talked about. He had his own personal home in there, which has been on a few architecture tours. What was the name of that?
The Shangri-La.
The Shangri-La. And it's got kind of a cool water feature which goes inside and into the living room.
Yeah, it's pretty neat.
Pretty cool property if you ever get the chance to see it.
But so one thing about the neighborhood, it is a more rectilinear layout of the neighborhood, except that a lot of the streets don't actually go anywhere. They kind of go hit a dead end, like a cul-de-sac, and then you have to turn around. So that is nice because it alleviates the traffic. But also, not all of the homes in the neighborhood were built by Tom Gist. Actually, a large percentage of them were built by other builders. So there's a lot of homes in there. They're all pretty much ranch-style homes, but there's a lot of red brick homes, and then there's some burnt adobe as well.
But they all are pretty cool, architecturally interesting homes.
Yeah.
Like it's a neat area.
It's a great neighborhood.
Not on the historic, it's not a historic district, but location-wise, it's close to Park Mall, close to Broadway, near a lot of restaurants, shopping, etc. So a great neighborhood to check out. And then also, what's kind of cool about it, it's a little bit more of a magnet type of a neighborhood, but then there's some neat, lesser known neighborhoods around, which would still afford some architectural interest, but maybe a little easier on the budget. If you learned anything from this video, please tap the like button and of course subscribe, and leave any comments for some content that you would like to see in future videos. Thanks for watching.